This Elijah guy, this prophet Elijah, he's got a lot of nerve. Like he's got Alec Baldwin nerve in Glengarry Glen Ross, and this is Jack Lemmon's response to that nerve. The prophet Elijah has the nerve to call people out. Did you catch the things he did that no one would dare to do? He's in the presence of the king, and the king calls him a troublemaker, and he just gives it right back. You're the troublemaker. Try doing that with a ruler. That takes a lot of nerve. And if that's not enough, he insults the ruler's ancestors, says they are the problem. Takes a lot of nerve. It's not easy being a prophet. And if that's not enough with the king, he tells the king what to do. He doesn't ask. He tells the king what to do. King, you gather the people together. Bring them to me. And here's the thing about kings and prophets in the Old Testament. Kings, they know you need to listen to the prophets. Elijah doesn't stop there. The people gather, and he has the nerve to call them out. Why are you limping between two opinions? Calls them out for their unfaithfulness. And then the opposing, the competing prophets, he insults, he mocks them, it says. Just mocks them right to their face. And you wouldn't catch this without understanding some of the background to the sacrificial practices. But Elijah knew that if he taunted the prophets, that they'd turn up the heat, so to speak, on themselves. He knew that if prophets really needed to go the extra mile, they'd start slashing themselves. And so he mocks them, and that's what they do. He's got a lot of nerve. A lot of nerve, this prophet Elijah. But despite all of that, that's not the best part. That's not the part with the most nerve. Did you catch in the story, there's a drought going on. There's not much water to be found. These people who have all gathered together, they probably had to slug some water with them for this long wait of sacrifice. Water is limited, and what does Elijah have the gall to do? He sets up his altar for sacrifice, and he digs a trench around it, and he says, take 4 vessels of water and pour it in the trench. I know you don't have much water, just pour it in the trench. And they do it. And if that's not bold enough, almost if that's not thoughtless enough, he says, do it again. So they take all that water and they pour it in the trench. And if that's not enough, he says, do it again. The water that they brought with them for the sacrifice is now all sitting there in the trench. Like a ditch of water. That takes a lot of nerve. That's the guy you're dealing with when you're dealing with Elijah. And he's making a point. I'm going to show you a God of abundance. I know you're all worried about scarcity. I know this drought has you worrying. I know you're human beings. We need water. But once and for all, can people just come to trust that God provides, that God has an abundance of grace? So he just taps right into all of their fears of scarcity so that what happens next really hits home with them. Now, reading this story, especially today, it's a bit worrisome, because do we really need another contest about whose God is the greatest? Do we need to be chasing each other around to prove whose God is the greatest? We know that those kinds of competitions, they don't go anywhere, nowhere good, and they sometimes result in war. Wars that are fought over scarcity, but more importantly, this is the point, fought over the perception of scarcity. Wars fought over an imagined scarcity. Scarcity of water, scarcity of land, scarcity of protection and safety. We don't need any more contests where people use God as an excuse to fight over God's riches and God's abundance. So many human failings have ended in war. And those failings come with a price tag that's paid by other people. So much of humanity's failures at keeping the peace have ended in war. And then other people are sent off to absorb the consequences of that failure. So many failures of humanity to keep in check a lust, a desire for power, a inability, a failure to just calm and soothe our desire for others' lands, others' resources. And those failures come with a price tag that other people have to pay. So it may seem on the surface that the story we read about Elijah is a great big contest about whose God is greatest, but that's not what Elijah is up to. Elijah wants the people of Israel to stop chasing after a God that is a projection of their fear of scarcity. There's a drought going on, and people are afraid, and so they hoard resources, and they pursue a God in a way like you would treat God as some tool to be manipulated. If you believe that your fears of scarcity rise to the level of sacred, then you're going to follow a God in a way that uses that God as a tool. But Elijah wants people to know our God is a God of abundance, and we want that God of abundance to use us as a tool for the sharing of that abundance. Elijah is saying, do you want to follow a God that you treat as a tool for your fear? Or do you want to be used by a God of abundance who will use you to share that abundant love in the world? Have you ever in your life felt as though you alone, and only you, as Elijah put it, are standing against the rest of the world? Have you ever in your life felt as though you know in your heart that you're right? You know the difference between right and wrong, but you feel as though you're standing against the whole world, that the world is standing against you. And that is such a tough place to stand. When you feel as though you might be wrong because everybody disagrees with you. And maybe it's just some small matter where you see an injustice and you wonder, is no one else going to act? Do I remain silent or do I say something? No one else is going to act. Do I step forward and do I do something? Like sometimes the entire world standing against us is the world standing in passivity. And we're left wondering, am I alone in this moment where I have to do what is right? Our God is a God of abundance. And when we are standing alone, we can remind ourselves that we are not alone, that God is with us, that we can, like Elijah, not treat God like some vending machine, but we can focus on our relationship with God. Is my heart open to God's abundance? Are my fears of scarcity soothed by God's grace, so that when I'm in the world and I feel as though I'm standing alone, that I can dig that trench and I can let God's abundance flow into it. And I can stand at that line in the sand and be sure that injustice is met with justice. That I can stand at that line and make sure that at that trench there can be peace instead of war. That I can stand at that line, in that trench, to make sure that I am a vessel for God of love and not hate. What will we do in that trench with God's abundance this week in our world?